Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the previous to the last session of today's event, Forward Preparing Organizations, Leaders, and People for 2022. And we have spoken and talked about a lot of things today, innovation, agility, learning, strategy, workplace policy, and of course, we can't get ready for any future if we don't talk about building diverse and truly inclusive organizations and about data, which will be the last panel of the day. So this next panel, we will be digging deeper into the understanding, ideas, insights, actionable items that we can think of to build a truly diverse and inclusive organization. So this is one of my most favorite conversations, and I'm very passionate about this because, well, I made a lot of mistakes in this area, and I can't get enough of the learning that is required for us to not only become more aware, but take action to never make those same mistakes again, especially in a space that is so sensitive and so powerful as diversity, equity, inclusion, and of course, belonging. So I am going to welcome our panelists today. Wendy, Renuka, Alicia, and Allison, welcome. It's great to have you today in this panel. Thank you so much for joining. Very excited to have you here. And we're going to kick off this panel the way I do it with all the panels is same way, which is I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but I'm going to ask you to also respond to one question as you are introducing yourselves. The past 18 months changed a lot of things, but not just because of COVID. You know, we saw the reemergence of the Black Lives Matter movement in America after George Floyd was murdered last year. Before that, some organizations were thinking perhaps on the sidelines about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but now they know that it's an integral part, a critical part of their business strategy. But there are still some unconvinced business leaders that see DEI on the sidelines, right? They don't see it as core part of their business. So if you were to put them all in the same room, all of the business leaders in the world that still do not think that DEI should be core part of their strategy, you put them all in the same room, how do you convince them that it is not just a human rights imperative, but it's a business imperative to think about DEI and building a truly diverse and inclusive organization? So, big question to kick off this panel. So, if you can respond to that together with introducing yourself, then we are on a great journey here for our conversation. So anybody who wants to jump in first, by the way, you're all muted. So please, you can unmute yourself when you want to jump in and start participating in the panel. So anybody wants to go first?
I will always go first. I'm always going to raise my hand.
Go for it.
Alicia saw me. She was like, Wendy's going to go for it. My name is Wendy Rentschler, and I lead global corporate social responsibility for BMC Software. And under that umbrella, we have ESG, DEI, sustainability, and our philanthropic global citizenship work. What I would say to a group of leaders in a room is, how is your win rate right now in your sales process? Because I'll tell you, working at a global company, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not pulled into an RFP, RFI with a prospect, channel partner, our current clients asking us where we are on any of those indicators in that ESG lifecycle, how we are currently demonstrating that work, and how we plan to move that work forward and investing in the workforce of the future. And if we aren't able to speak to that, we're losing some really big clients, because there are 10 other companies at a minimum that are more than willing to do the work themselves. So,
well, if that doesn't convince the business leaders that are not convinced already, I don't know what would, right? Wendy, thank you so much. Welcome to the panel. Alicia, you want to go next?
Yes. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having all of us. This is such a pleasure to be here and to talk about such an important topic. I'm Alicia Campbell. I'm the founder and CEO of Culture Shift HR, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy firm focused on helping organizations build inclusive cultures through the core and lens of their employees. And Enrique, to your question, the first thing I would actually say to those business leaders in the room is take a look around. They would, I'm assuming probably at this point, majority of them would be white, much older males. And I think that in of itself tells a really strong story of those individuals of look at the lack of diversity within this room and think about what that lack of diversity is stopping from you in terms of growing your businesses, of being able to meet and exceed the needs of and expectations of your clients, of your consumers, and really more and more importantly, the culture of your employees. If you don't have those diverse thoughts and those diverse perspectives really at the table and being vocal and heard and seen, you're missing out on a massive opportunity to really connect and really have an authentic workplace. And so I think that would be a really great data point to see, okay, who's really in the room right now and where is the lack of opportunity that everybody's not seeing?
Fantastic, Alicia. Thank you so much. And we're going to be digging very much deeper into how to, unpacking all of those ideas and how to make it happen in the workplace. Who wants to go next?
I can go.
All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Sproul. I lead people and talent for a health tech startup called ConnectRN, which allows clinicians and nurses to pick up shifts at local healthcare facilities whenever and wherever they want. Ultimately, what I might say to that room of leaders is a question of, do you think that you know more than the consultants over at McKinsey? I mean, how many reports have they put out over the years about how diverse teams win? Like, there's just so much data that, DEI teams, HR teams, people ops teams can arm themselves with to prove the point here alongside, the heart of the matter of the actual people involved in the business. So I would go forth with data.
Fantastic. And the data that we have is already enough, right? To create the case. It's time for action. Last but not least.
Hi, everybody. And thank you, Enrique, for inviting all of us to this conversation. My name is Renuka Iyer, and I lead human resources for World Resources Institute. We're a global think tank, primarily in the area of sustainability. So we do work on climate change, energy efficiencies, food loss, water, all of those things. Well, if I'm speaking to that room full of highly accomplished people, and my colleagues have already reminded them to look around and see what the data is telling them, I would also ask them the question, how did you get here? How did you become so successful? It's because you paid attention to your circle of influence, isn't it? And so as you grew your circle of influence, your business grew. And we are going through the social revolution right now. And now's the time to pay attention to even grow out that circle of influence further. So if your business has to survive, your circle of influence has to encompass everyone that's part of the social revolution. And the only way to do that is to open your eyes and look around and do what's needed to do to survive.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here and for already sharing such powerful messages to that room of what most likely looks like white men, right? Because that's the composition of most business leaders still, at least in the United States. And, that shows how much work we have to do. Now, we're talking about building a truly diverse and inclusive organization. And I want to put out a statement of that somebody, actually an HR leader, told me when we were talking about building a truly and inclusive organization. She said to me, I started building a truly and inclusive organization when I stopped thinking about diversity only in terms of gender diversity. Only when I stopped thinking about that was I able to start thinking about what a truly diverse and inclusive organization was, because we were so focused on gender diversity that we missed that we missed minorities from ethnic groups, from races, from different backgrounds, people that experience or are living with a disability. So I want to ask you how that statement, how does that, kind of like resonate with you? And, what's your response to that sort of a statement? And I say this because, you look across the board and still there's heavy focus on gender diversity as the only kind of diversity that organizations need to be tackling. So anybody wants to, comment on this question? Feel free to jump in.
Enrique, I think we all have deep thoughts about this. You got to call on people. We're trying to be nice and not talk over each other. But I'll go first.
Go for it.
I think that that statement is absolutely true. I mean, unfortunately, gender diversity should be a table stake at this point, but it's not. We can just look at corporate America in the C-suite and look at that. Even in healthcare, I worked in healthcare for 10 years, and 80% of women, people that identify as women, work in healthcare, yet I think they make up maybe like 6% of the C-suite. I don't even know how that's possible. But certainly you have to have a more agnostic view. Working at a global company, I can tell you that one of the things that we really focus on is, there's so much nuance to everyone's journey. And like, you're not going to know everything about every holiday, every event, every person's culture, but like being intentional about trying to get to know it is an important first step. And so what we've done at BMC is we use this really great app called Culture Pop. And Enrique and Alicia know that I was in HR tech for a long time, and it is one of the loves of my life. And it was really hard to find diversity, equity, and inclusion software that wasn't US centric. It's even hard to find tools like that aren't just US centric when you're in a global organization talking about only US problems. Now, certainly, racial discrimination happens all over the world, but it's the same book with a different cover. But sometimes people can't connect those dots together, and they want to see things that reflect their journey more closely. And so using Culture Pop has been a really great way, because it's micro learning, it's an app, it's anonymous, it does push notifications, and it really meets people where they are in their own journey, because you have to be mindful of that, especially if you're in a global organization. That's like the biggest key. If you work in a global organization, don't make things US centric, because you intentionally are becoming exclusive by trying to be inclusive and starting in one place. Started everywhere.
Fantastic, Wendy. Thank you so much for sharing that. By the way, talking about diversity and inclusion, I acknowledged this at the beginning of the event today, but today is Yom Kippur Day, and many of the members of our community observe the Yom Kippur holiday. And of course, I told them we're doing this live, but all of the sessions will be recorded and available to you. And what's funny about this, it's funny, but also, a call to action to me is that I didn't know about Yom Kippur being on September the 16th. So, by just coincidentally, I planned this event for today. But once I realized, I started putting out messages saying, we know, how important the most important holiday for the Jewish community is. So, this is what we're doing to make sure that you are not excluded of this conversation. So anyway, just wanted to say that again, because it's part of the learning, right?
It's part of the journey. And that's such a great, I actually had an event yesterday, started Hispanic Heritage Month. Yeah. And today we had a kickoff event where we had a tour guide from Wanderlust Mexico Tours do a virtual tour of the origins of chocolate, sponsored by our Latin Employee Resource Group. Now, Yom Kippur is on a Hebrew calendar, so it changes your year, but Hispanic Heritage Month doesn't. And as an HR leader, sometimes no matter what you do, people are always going to have something to say and, might not be excluded, feel like they're excluded. But when you just continue to be as inclusive as possible, recognizing that some folks might get offended that you're having an event on the day, to Enrique's point, recording it, acknowledging that we want to be as mindful as possible of other holidays, because you're not going to get it 100% right all of the time. And even when you do, you might not always make everyone happy, and that's okay, just as long as you had the right intention behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're figuring out along the way. So everybody's learning in this journey. Alison, Alicia, Renuka, do you want to add anything to this question?
I can add some. My opinion is gender diversity and taking that lens in itself is flawed. Why am I saying that? When organizations think about gender diversity, what we're actually thinking about is a sex assigned at birth. That's all. We're not really looking at gender identity, gender expression, and therefore the concept of using gender as a lens in itself is flawed. And I think when one expands the lens of diversity to be more inclusive, then you could account for all other aspects of diversity, whether that's generational diversity, whether that's true gender diversity in terms of gender expression and gender identities, or also in terms of race, religion, political affiliation. I mean, it's really looking at being human, isn't it? So unless one really takes that lens off, the narrow lens of sex assigned at birth, and really begins to look at what do I mean when I'm creating a fair, equitable, and inclusive workspace for my staff, or for productivity. How do I go about doing that? And if you want to do some hard work on that, then you got to take that you got to bring that what do you call that? That you have to have that long lens, the wide angle lens, as you can say.
Yeah.
The wide angle lens. That's what is needed.
Absolutely. Renuka, thank you for sharing that. Alicia, Alison, do you want to add anything to this?
Just to continue to add to what the group has already shared, is that it's so key that we, as we're going on this journey, that we continue to understand the different diversity dimensions. And I think when anyone that's listening to this session right now, it can be extremely overwhelming to know that, okay, wow, like maybe they thought they were doing really great of gender diversification in the company, and I was like, oh my God, we just blew their mind when it comes to the gender spectrum. But it's a learning process. And I think the fact that you're here, the fact that you're learning and you're going to walk away with so much information, you may feel a little bit, heavy at the end of this. That means that there's more work to do. And if there's more work to do, then that's where we can make those improvements. That's where we can really start to move the needle in incredible ways that other organizations may not even be thinking about as yet. And so I think it's important that as we're, together for this hour, that we really understand the intention and the purpose of what we're trying to do when we're trying to be more inclusive, and utilizing the best resources possible to ensure that we're aware, to make sure that we're up to date, and to know that we're, as Wendy was saying, doing things with the best intention possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alicia, for sharing that. Alison, last but not least.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would add is obviously that gender diversity is only a piece of the puzzle. I mean, so often like Wendy was referencing, gender diversity now is looked at as table stakes, and thankfully more and more companies are recognizing the importance of racial and ethnic diversity. But I think another diversity piece that a lot of companies, particularly in tech, are continuing to really miss the needle on is age diversity. And so, just another thing to keep your mind on.
Absolutely. One of the things that we've been talking about throughout the day is this idea that, first of all, not everyone can do HR, but everything is HR. And let me translate that, to some examples, right? We think about culture. HR is not the sole responsible for architecting culture and for ensuring that the culture actually works. HR is not the only one to ensure performance, to measure and deliver or create an organization of high performance that is across the board. Historically, though, all of those things were thrown into HR, because corporate leaders saw them as processes, transactions that needed to be done by somebody, and they were thrown into HR. And I would hate for this to happen to DEI. I would hate for DEI down the road to be thrown into HR as another check mark in who knows what list, and be part of HR as the transaction administrator doing some DEI stuff. So my question to you is, how do we embed DEI as part of the end-to-end, across the board business strategy of our organization? Not as in, HR is working on gender diversity or bringing more candidates from other ethnicities or other races, but it's like part of the core of the strategy of the organization. I want to give you a couple of seconds to think about how we do that, and I want to go to our audience Thank you so much for being here. Once again, I know some of you have been with us since this morning. It's been a long day. We have one more panel after this. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who are just joining now or joined recently, all of the sessions today are being recorded. We're going to be sharing them next week in the Hacking Nature Lab, individual videos, so you can watch whatever makes sense for you. And once again, thank you so much for being here. Coming back to our panelists, how do we embed DEI into the everything so that the CFO, the CTO, the guy who works in the reception of the company, if we had an office, the person who is picking up the phone, as the assistant of the CEO, that for everybody DEI has a meaning for the organization. Anybody wants to jump in here to respond to that question?
I can kick us off here, and maybe it's a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but I very firmly believe that the best way to delineate diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging from something under the HR or people bucket is by making it its own separate function that's ultimately reporting into the CEO. And that should be a function that works in very close alignment and walk step with people operations and talent acquisition, but ultimately is not an HR function specifically. And so by having that separate department reporting into the office of the CEO, you're getting that influence, but you're also able to then have closer partnerships with other departments as well, without having it maybe come from the lens where sometimes, in organizations, you do still have to overcome the stigma of and fear of interacting with HR, where diversity, equity, and inclusion is ultimately so important to help to bring everybody together and create that belonging within the organization. I think that it's just the easiest way to help delineate the two, personally.
Thank you, Alison, for sharing that. I appreciate it. Alicia, I think you want to go next. Hey, you're beating Wendy going first, by the way.
No, I love what Alison said, because it's so true. And my heart goes out to every single HR practitioner and professional who is literally carrying the weight of not only DE&I, but the whole HR practice within their business. And a lot of organizations, I think, still underestimate and undermine the power of human resources and their people group, because it is such a powerful engine, and they are so much more than what leaders and other staff give them credit for. So my heart goes out to you, because not only in regards to the DE&I space, but just in the past 18 months, there has been immense pressure on our HR practitioners and professionals. So, my heart and thoughts are with you. I think what's important to add what Alison said is that it's so key that we acknowledge what DE&I is, and that it's a very kind of matrix element, bringing in HR, bringing in, the various business leaders, because when you really want to really start to spark and get DE&I in all facets of the business, you need all those people at the table. And that's when the change can really happen. And it starts at the top from, an overarching DE&I strategy that is then created and funneled and helped to be executed through the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. But everyone being able to see that you own this, there needs to be an element of accountability and responsibility. That is why those other voices are so key. And then that's where we start to see the actions and the changes in the various elements of the business, whether it be operations, finance, HR, project management. Everything can then need to be seen through the lens of DE&I. And so we can't just have, this amazing practice, covered in a little corner somewhere. It really needs to be the center and spotlighted in every single business problem and every single solution, and really the way people start to see how businesses start to be managed and transformed. And so again, that can seem like a very overwhelming task, but I think when we think about DE&I, it's like, oh, it has to happen in an instant. But there's a maturity to this practice. And I think even understanding what that looks like to you, your organization, to other businesses, just shows how vast this area truly is. And so setting the right expectations, getting the right people to be invested, to take accountability, is going to be immensely key to really start to get that spread across the company.
Fantastic, Alicia. And I want to add something really, really quick to what you just said. We always talk about HR getting a seat at the table, but there are hundreds of tables in the organization where HR is not sitting. And the danger of not having this co-ownership of DEI is that in the tables where HR is not sitting, that conversation may not be coming up. Whereas if there's co-ownership of a strategic sort of a framework around DEI and how it impacts everything in the organization, even when HR is not sitting there, or a DEI exclusive function is not sitting there, they will still think about that. They will still think about the implications of DEI, on the decisions they are making in that one table where nobody from DEI, quote unquote, is actually sitting. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Wendy, and then Renuka.
Yeah, so I agree with both Elsa and Alicia. Specifically around like using the lens of DEI throughout the entire business framework. For example, like I speak at all of our all hands and I'm talking to marketing about how we can leverage already great work we're doing in the external marketing collateral that we do in the demand generation journey. I'm talking to sales about how we can cast the lens of our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives already in the sales cycle, adding our corporate social responsibility report into the signature, making sure that we are using like our diversity, equity, and inclusion blog about our thought partnership in our touch points during our account management journey. These are ways that not only is it talking to the ROI of CSR and DEI, but it's also really facilitating the message and making you as a business a trendsetter in the industry. Additionally, DEI really can be using that filter. I think a lot of times people are like DEI and HR. I'm like, you should be casting that lens on everything that you do in HR, from putting that onto your benefits book and making sure you have like BIPOC mental health resources available, understanding like your employee population and what they need, the different educational journeys they're on. And you oftentimes have so many of these resources. It's just like having this DEI lens and going back to your vendors that you currently have right now and saying, how can I demonstrate my diversity, equity, and inclusion intention in the programs that you're already offering to me? I think that's really powerful. HR is a profit center. 70% on average of an employer's spend is on their human capital. Yeah. If you are doing this right and you are using your HR tech and your HR business partners in the way that is human-centered, thoughtful, and intentional, you can turn your HR into a profit center because you're not spending all this money on talent acquisition with your revolving door. You're elevating employee engagement, which makes your employees healthier, which drives down your premiums. It is a cost center, and you have to look at it like that because it is your biggest investment.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Wendy. Renuka, do you want to add anything to this?
I can add to what Wendy just said. I completely agree that HR can be a very powerful unit that organizations have. And in fact, I run HR. It might sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but in terms of talent brand, there is research that tells you that interactions with HR, how people experience interactions with HR, will either let them continue to stay with the organization or leave, right? So HR has a very powerful role to play. Now, the question of where should DEI sit? I have seen DEI sit outside of HR. I've seen DEI sit within HR. At the place that I work, DEI reports into me, so it sits within HR. So I'm going to make the case for DEI to sit within HR. But having said that, it doesn't really matter where DEI sits, right? What matters is that it has management support, that what needs to be done has executive support. I often say the bottleneck to the bottle is at the top, right? So we've got to break that. That bottleneck has to open. We need a bottle with a wider neck. We've got to put DEI at the center of it all. I've heard so many organizations say, well, people are our greatest assets. So if people are your greatest assets, then the work on DEI is crucial because you want to include all those people in your strategy to get the results you want. So I'm not particularly where DEI is organized in terms of the business unit. I'm agnostic to it. Doesn't really matter. But what I will say is, in organizations, policies, processes allow it to get the information workflow a certain way. Organizations' policies and processes make managers behave a certain way. And therefore, if DEI, the concepts of DEI are well baked into HR, everything that HR does, whether it's recruitment, whether it's promotion, whether it's providing training opportunities, whether it is internal hiring, whatever it is, even exiting the employee, right? So whatever processes that are there in HR, if we do that through the DEI lens, then I think that's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. So separating out the two, I don't think is a good idea. Integrating them even more tightly to make it a truly, a profound talent brand of sorts is where the trick is going to be.
Awesome, Renuka. Thank you so much for sharing that as well. We're talking about building a truly diverse and inclusive organization. I think I missed one word in that name. Building a truly diverse, inclusive, and equitable organization. And I want to bring that up because sometimes, and this may sound a little controversial, the DEI and B of belonging strategy is not that E. It's not that equitable as a strategy. And let me explain what I mean by this. Last year, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, the DEI, the flexibility within DEI should have led us down the way of helping our communities of color in our organizations for what they individually were feeling, and going through. I mean, we were all going through some level of pain, but it was particularly felt by our communities of color in our organizations. So within the DEI strategy, how can we make it flexible so that, for example, when, hopefully that never happens again, but last year was very hard for the Black community, at least in the United States, and for the Asian and Pacific Islander community in the United States because of all that happened with COVID. So how can we create and design our DEI and B strategy that, is strategic, but it also provides some level of flexibility to say, what, we've been working very hard in including, in increasing gender diversity, but look at what's going on with our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. We need to pause 1 second, or maybe continue working on this area, but dedicate extra attention, extra resources to these groups that are being affected in a more significant way during this, past 3 or 4 months or whatever the time frame is. So how can we build that strategic sort of approach, having long-term metrics and outcomes, but also building in some flexibility to understand that groups are impacted and affected in different ways during different times, when things happen in our country and around the world, of course.
I think that's a really great perspective, Enrique. And I think it's important that, and you kind of hit it right on the head, is understanding how these different groups, although we may all relate in a certain way or even be affected a certain way, that these groups have their own identities, and every identity needs to be respected in its own right. And I think, to your point, saying, okay, what is it that our African American community needs right now? What is it that our Asian and Pacific Islander community need right now? Because the support systems may look different, the resources may look different, the historical traumas and identity erasing elements have been so prevalent over the decades that the way that we need to reconcile and bring reconciliation into the equation is going to vary based on not only the cultural backgrounds, but the locations, geography, and a lot of the other elements that we may not even be aware of. So I think to the forefront of that is, what is the education part of this? Because what we don't want to do is start to bring in all these solutions that really aren't meeting the actual need of what is going on in the crux of the issue. And so I think understanding, really reaching out to the community to play the part of allyship and really starting to create bridges of communication, creating bridges of support is going to be absolutely ideal, because what we don't want to do is start to overcompensate or come in a way that isn't genuine, isn't authentic, and really may even make the situation worse and may replicate previous historical traumatic experiences. So I think really being able to communicate from an educational perspective and really support element is going to be absolutely ideal in the different scenarios that you had shared.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing that. Wendy, I know you want to go next.
Yes, we just like to go back and forth. Yeah. Yeah. So this is not an am all be all, but 3 letters, EAP, Employee Assistance Program. I've been in HR for 15 years. I worked in benefits technology as an HR leader at a benefits tech firm for 6 years, and it is historically underutilized, like 3 to 5%. And your EAP has so many different resources during different times, whether it's COVID, whether it's BIPOC specific mental health resources, whether it is transition resources. And your AP, like we use Magellan, we can call them and be like, hey, we really want to make sure that we are highlighting our transition for transgender or people going through transgender with our EAP. They have a PDF one pager that you can use as a piece internally to share, leveraging your pride groups or your LGBTQ employee resource groups, putting it in an internal posting, making sure that you're giving it to everyone. Don't be exclusive, always be inclusive. You don't know what people's journey are, and you should never assume. And using these tools, they oftentimes have so many things: COVID, mental health resources, veterans resources. These are all examples I've used in just the last 6 weeks. So especially, and if you're in a global organization, you have these resources at your hand globally. It's, to Alicia's point, you don't need to specifically go out and buy more things. Look at what you currently have and leverage them internally, and use your ambassadors inside your organization to evangelize and mobilize them, because then your employees start to feel seen and heard. And that's really like the most important piece. And also to don't weigh on your employees that are already having like generational or historical traumas by asking them to answer questions on their behalf of whatever, observance it might be.
Thank you, Wendy, for sharing those insights. Renuka, I think you wanted to add something to this question.
I certainly can. So when you're thinking about equity, the way I think about it, and I'm glad Wendy started off by saying, employees want to be seen, heard, and I'll add want to make sure that they feel valued, right? So those, I think, would be the 3. It is just acknowledging them for what they're saying. I've seen often this past 2 years, I've seen leaders listen to their staff, and as they listen to their staff, they will reflect on it, and they'll say what they'll say, and they'll say, but.
Yeah.
No, forget the but. Just acknowledge what your staff are telling you, because that is their reality. And I have to correct myself on it sometimes. So it's not easy. It's easy to say that you've got to stop saying but it's not easy to do it. And I said but in that sentence. But having said that, the way I think about equity, I think about economic equity and experiential equity, right? And when you're thinking about economic equity, we're thinking about your compensation practices, your bonus programs, your benefits programs, and making sure that everyone has equal access to maybe a promotion request, a promotion opportunity within the organization, or maybe a training opportunity, participation in a leadership program. So all of that is the economic opportunity. And then the experiential opportunity is equity is the ability to influence decision-making within the organization. Whose voice gets heard is important. So tracking those things, I think, is important as you think about equity, and tracking them and calling them out, and asking leaders what voices are not heard, such that if they are heard, you will get more innovation, because at the end of the day, you want something for the organization, and that something is innovation and impact. So, making sure that those connections are made, and I think HR can help make those connections and ask those questions.
I love that. And by the way, that requires a very special kind of leadership, to be able to sort of acknowledge those voices that are not being heard, and intentionally bring them to the stage, and make sure that they are included as part of the conversations going on in the company. Alison, you want to add anything to this question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, before you can get to the step of sharing those educational resources and listening, you first have to ask the question and then shut up to listen, right? So, but the way that we've approached it at ConnectRN is by having an inclusion survey. And so before you go to create a whole broad DEI strategy, it's important to figure out what is the most important thing, to your employee population, and what you might have thought from your people in HR perspective should be a priority for your DEI strategy might actually be entirely wrong when you've actually stopped to ask that question and hear out the needs of your employees. And so I guess the kind of overarching theme is like, first ask the question, listen, and then educate.
Absolutely. And when you ask the question, like you said before, I love the shut up, just, first of all, you gotta be, if you're asking, just give people the opportunity to tell you, with genuineness and authenticity and psychological safety, what they need to say, because it's going to create, not only is going to help you see what you don't see, from the beginning, but it's going to create so many opportunities to do things differently, to innovate, like Renuka said before, and to add and create more value. We're getting closer to the end of our chat, and I want to ask you one last question. We're talking about building truly diverse and inclusive and now equitable organizations as well. And, we've been doing this out of the context in which we are living in today, which is, a new approach to work. So many people working remotely or in hybrid environments. So let me add now that element of complexity to the question of how to create, DEIB strategies that work in this new environment. So, so this last question to you is, if you can be very tactical, for the benefit of the participants of this conversation and HR leaders, if you can be very tactical around how, what should they keep in mind to create DEI and B strategies that work, taking into account the new reality of work in which we are immersed right now, meaning companies remote, companies either going back to the office, or companies doing more of a hybrid and flexible approach?
Don't be scared of virtual. I recognize early on, I've been a remote worker for a long time and hybrid from time to time in the last 10 years, but really this virtual environment that I used to do future of work consulting, and we would talk about 3 to 5 year engagements, and COVID literally did it over the weekend, right? So now we're like, okay, now we're in this virtual work or hybrid work environment. How do we work together? I think us working virtual and hybrid now has given us the ability to connect now more globally than we ever had before. And if you have that opportunity, do that, because that is just going to contextualize your DEIB program even more. If you are at a large organization, like I said, I am over our ESG, DEI, sustainability, and corporate citizenship and volunteerism. Those are not mutually exclusive ideas. Those are all very interconnected and oftentimes have the same adversely impacted or positively impacted beneficiaries or non-beneficiaries. And so being able to weave in all of those things into your DEIB program, like your ERGs, doing them virtually, and then within those ERGs doing Kiva micro lending. What a great story to tell about creating microeconomic empowerment and investing in the workforce of the future. So don't be scared of the virtual. And if you have a virtual meeting, but you have some people in the office, then everyone be virtual. That's just like one rule of thumb that you should always live by. So embrace the hybrid, embrace the virtual, and embrace that you are creating, you are giving people more psychological safety. I think there's not a day that goes by we don't see an article about women, people that identify as women, and specifically, and more BIPOC communities feeling safer in remote environments, feeling like they can be more authentic. You should embrace that. And that's also going to help you in your talent acquisition strategy too. So take it on. We have the internet, we have video conferencing, it connects us more. And I wish you the best of luck, because HR is incredibly been a, just empowering role, but no good deed goes unpunished, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Wendy. Thank you so much. Don't be afraid of the virtual. Alicia, you want to go next?
Yes, I think to exactly Wendy's point, virtual is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's going to continue to, I think, connect and expand and really start to, I would say, supercharge the way that we engage and do business. And so with that, instead of, like Wendy said, being afraid of it, let's embrace it. Let's understand how we can utilize it.
Alicia, we lost you. Alicia, we lost your sound in there. You're muted again. Give me 1 second.
No, it's, am I good?
Yeah. Now you're back. Yeah.
Okay, we're good. All right. So with being virtual and that equitability piece, it's so key that we understand that given the nature of our employee base, we need to make sure that there's resources available so that we can all connect in the same way, but that meets our needs on a one-to-one basis. I think with equitability and what gets organizations a little bit scared is that they feel that they have to offer a million and one solutions to something, but it really isn't that complicated. If we think about where, if we're in our homes, what that means with families, with people living with disabilities or family members with disabilities, or even in one parent or one spousal homes, we have to be able to make sure that we have the resources and the support to make sure that everyone can connect together. And so it's not necessarily having a million solutions, but it's having the right solutions for your people to make sure that they feel supported, to make sure that they can advance and still feel part of the team, and also all contributing to that inclusive virtual culture. And so anything that allows that is going to make your teams that much more successful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing those insights as well. Allison?
I think that as we have this major shift towards remote and hybrid workforces, it's a really easy time to just pause and actually audit your existing policy and process, because what you might have had in place for X amount of years might not be applicable anymore. If you're now a remote first company, why do you have a dress code that requires people to wear a certain something or have their hair or nails a certain length, And so I think ultimately it's just a great opportunity to revisit what you've already had. And even outside of the shift to remote and hybrid, I think that regularly going back and auditing what is your current policy and process will really help you to determine what shifts you can make towards a more equitable workplace.
I love that. By the way, I gotta add to that it's a great opportunity to actually change, a lot of the things that we couldn't change before. So thank you for that. Renuka?
Thank you. I think some of those comments that we heard were absolutely phenomenal. I'm reminded of what Brene Brown says in her book. She says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so, making sure that there is clarity. I'm often reminded that we're asking some of our staff to work from home, but are they really working from home or living at work? They bring their families to their work. So making sure that leaders, as Allison said, stop, think about whether your policies work for you, but also think about the work you're doing and ask yourself, is this what is really needed in this new age world to move the needle in terms of your work? And then be very clear and specific with your team about why you're doing what you're doing and what is it that you want done, and be very clear. So clarity, I think, will be the first one. The second one is prioritization. We are dealing with a situation in which there are so many stressors. All worlds, your social life, your family life, and your work life is all getting mixed up, and therefore the number of stressors have suddenly increased. And so being very clear and prioritizing on behalf of the employee, because the employees are not able to prioritize for themselves. So as if organizations can, if teams can, if managers can prioritize for others, I think that would be my second point. And then the third point would be, this is a social revolution, right? So welcome. It's an experiment. We're not going to get everything right. So be willing to experiment and keep changing and be open about it. Hey, we're going to try this. If it works, great. We'll continue to use that approach. But if it's not going to work, guess what? We don't even have to throw it out of the window. It can just disappear, right? And we can try something new. So just treating this new social revolution as a social experiment and see what works best for all. Because if you're very clear of what you want done, then everything else can kind of revolve around it, and we can be more inclusive.
Absolutely. I love the idea of being embracing the reality of being in a massive global social experiment where most people, and actually probably all of the people in the world, don't have it figured out yet, and we're all in this in the quest to find answers together. And in finding those, in trying to find those answers, we're gonna get some things right, and we're gonna make some mistakes. And hopefully, as we make those mistakes, we become aware of them and we change course when needed. So, Wendy, Renuka, Alicia, Allison, thank you so much for spending this time with me and the community here of participants, listening to you and learning from you. Great insights, and hoping that it has inspired this community to continue to become more aware and take action to build truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive organizations. So thank you so much. And everybody, stay tuned. In about 10 minutes, we're kicking off the last panel of the day, Designing Data-Informed HR Strategy and Operations. So we're going to be wrapping up the event today with talking about data. See you in 10 minutes. Wendy, Renuka, Alicia, Allison, one more time, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.